And there we go. So, again, really good evening to everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Laura Piercy. I am one of the associate directors of LeSwap, and part of my remit is further education, higher education, pathways, and leading on those aspects, looking really at our destinations and what our students do when they leave us. So this morning, sorry, not definitely not morning, this evening, I am going to be talking to you about early entry courses. It is a very much an introduction to those courses. So I'm not going to go into loads and loads of detail. There will be much more detail for students as the year goes on. If you have any specific questions, please do put them in the chat and I will answer them at the end of the presentation. And if you have some really specific questions, so very, very detailed questions about a particular young person, a particular student, or a particular situation, please do feel free to email me. And again, my email is at the end of the presentation. So we shall start. Fantastic. So, starting at the very beginning, then, as I said, I am going to start off with the real basics of this because I know there will be people on the call for whom this is completely brand new. So, first of all, why do we call it early entry? And you hear us, you use this phrase early entry, abbreviate it quite a lot. It's simply because the courses that we're talking about this evening have a different deadline and it is an earlier deadline, hence the name early entry. So, to contextualize that, the deadline of all courses at Oxbridge, so every course at Oxford or Cambridge, excluding foundation courses, which again I'll talk a bit more about later, and all medicine, dentistry, or veterinary courses, regardless of the university that they're taught at. The deadline for all of those is October. So for your young people who are in year 12 at the minute, if they are wanting to start their course in 2026, they have to submit their application by the 15th of October, 2025. So that's why, as you see on the next slide, we're starting this conversation now, because even though it feels like we've barely started year 12 and we're already starting, going on about university, it actually comes around super quickly. The deadline for all other undergraduate courses is a few months later. So it's the last Wednesday in January. It will be the 28th of January, 2026. So it's a fair few months difference for those young people, and those few months really count. That means realistically, if you are wanting to apply to Oxford, Cambridge, or for a medicine or medicine adjacent course, you need to have your application done by the end of year 12. There's obviously time over summer to do a little bit of tweaking and a little bit of sort of fine tuning in September, but realistically, you've got to get that application done and sorted. So, we're looking at 2 terms time. And that's exactly why we're talking about this now and why I want to do this webinar and have this conversation now, because there is a lot of preparation involved in these type of course of applications. It is a little bit different to the standard UCAS application. Lots of these courses as well also have extra assessments, exams or pre-assessments, and they begin from the end of year 12. You certainly have to register for them at the end of year 12. So you really have to know what you're doing so you don't miss those deadlines. Work experience is mandatory for medicine applications and dentistry and veterinary applications. That work experience has to be started in year 12. And for Oxbridge, we say that supercurricular study is mandatory as well. These applications have to be really carefully written, really considered. And there's also interview prep to do after all that. So it's a bit of a process getting it in and getting it done. If you're unsure, so if you're sitting this evening thinking, I don't know, I'm interested, but I'm not sure, then prep now anyway. It can't hurt. Any prep you do for these applications will be equally applicable and will stand you in really good stead for applying to any other course at any other university. So, there's nothing lost if you do the prep and then you ultimately decide not to apply. So, saying that, there are lots of things that are really similar about the application. So the application form is identical. It goes through UCAS, which is the University and Colleges Admissions Service, which all undergraduate courses or nearly all undergraduate courses in the UK use. These are the same. The universities require the same information from the applicant. So they need all of your basic information, your admin information, your education, and a personal statement. That same personal statement goes to all of your choices. So just like applying to any other university, you can't write a separate Oxford statement or a separate medicine statement, for example. The same one is sent to all five admissions departments. And we'll talk about this much later for you folks. But when it comes to things like student loans, costs, maintenance loans, fees, it's the same. It costs the same. Just you obviously, a medicine degree is obviously longer than a standard undergraduate degree. So ultimately it costs more because you're there for longer, but the same amount per year. And the loan application, all that business is exactly the same. However, there are some really key differences. Firstly, the deadline, which I've already mentioned, is probably obviously one of the biggest differences. The number of courses you can apply for is slightly different. So, if you decide to apply to Oxford or Cambridge, you get five choices on a standard UCAS application. So, either five universities or five courses, but only one of those can be for Oxford or Cambridge per year. So, you have to decide which one and which course. The other four can be for any other unis and any other courses. If you're applying for medicine, four out of your five can be medicine. The fifth one has to be something else. Or if you want, you can just leave that fifth one blank and just apply for four. The style and content of the personal statement is quite different. I'm not going to talk in detail about personal statements today because it's a long time until they're going to be done. There will be support with that. But to summarize, this personal statement is much more focused on work experience or supercurricular learning as opposed to being just about A levels or BTECs. There are extra admissions tests, not for every course, but for most of them, although it is worth mentioning that some other universities, places like Warwick, UCL, Imperial, King's, also have admissions tests. So that's not unique to these courses. That is up to the student to check and make sure that they know if their course has extra entry requirements. Some courses at Oxford and Cambridge require you to send them some work before your interview. And finally, there are pretty much always interviews. Assume that you are going to have an interview. Interviews for other degrees are much less common. If you're applying for something like performing arts or a vocational degree, then you might have a portfolio submission or you might have an audition, but it's not so common to have an interview at most universities. However, at Oxbridge and for medicine and adjacent, it is definitely to be expected. Oxbridge also has a college system, which I'm going to touch on super briefly today. But again, we will go through that with students later on in the academic year. Finally, of course, and I'm sure this is something that you know and expect, it is highly competitive. I'll give you a sense of how competitive it is. Firstly, this evening, I'm going to talk a little bit about Oxford and Cambridge, and then I'm going to come on to medicine because they are a little bit different. Some of the photos you can see here are from our trip to Girton College at Cambridge earlier this academic year, which was lovely. So if you're trying to decide between Oxford and Cambridge, they are very similar institutions. They are structured very similarly. They've got very similar teaching styles, so on and so forth. The application process is identical. The interview process is very similar. And as I've already said, you could only choose one course per year at Oxford or Cambridge out of those five choices. Their academic standards are extremely high, as you may expect. And realistically, unless you are predicted A and A star grades, then it isn't worth applying, because the bar for entry, the entry requirements are very high. They are very strict. So if a student doesn't have A and A star grades, they're not going to get past that first round. So it's not really worth it taking up a space on your UCAS application. And they mainly offer traditional academic subjects, although you can do medicine and veterinary science as well there. The teaching style at both Oxford and Cambridge, as I said, is quite similar. It is quite a unique teaching style. It's very tutorial heavy, very small tutorials, often with just a couple of students. The teaching is quite intensive. Young people are expected to engage very, very independently and extensively with that tutorial and with the work. So just like everything, it's really worth you as a young person and you're having a conversation with your family and thinking through whether that's a kind of experience that you would like and you would enjoy at university, because it can be very intense. It is definitely worth, I would 100% recommend that you get to some open days, and get as involved with mentoring schemes, current Oxbridge students, things like that as you can, partly to get an advantage, but also to work out for yourself if this is a place that you want to apply. The timeline then. So, what do applications look like? So, in the summer of year 12, you must double check your entry requirements and register for any admissions tests that you need to take. Lots of subjects require admissions tests, and most of these now, you can't take these at school. These have to be booked at an exam centre. They're all over the country. There are quite a few in London, and they have to be booked independently by the student. Most of them are free. Some of them, like the LNAT for law and the UCAT for medicine, do have a cost. You then have to get your application in via UCAS by that October deadline. If you miss the deadline, you will not be considered. It is a hard deadline. If any work is requested, you must send over the requested work. That's usually for literature or humanities subjects. It's not new work. You don't have to write anything. They want to see specifically examples of work you've already done in class or for NEA, things like that. If you apply for Cambridge, there is an extra little application form. It's very short. It's really just submitting information about the modules you've done as part of your A levels. And that has to be completed straight after you submit your UCAS application. If you have an interview, you'll be invited to interview at the end of November, and the interviews will take place in the first 2 weeks of December. Some colleges will do assessments at interview, but you will know that in advance. It will never be sprung on you. Lots of the time, you will have 2 short interviews of about 25 to 30 minutes each. At the moment, most interviews are remote, so over Zoom or similar software, but a few colleges at Cambridge have gone back to doing them in person. So again, do check that when you apply. And then in January, you'll get your decision of, yes, we're going to make you an offer, or no, we're very sorry. There is also another system. Cambridge use a pooling system, whereby if you have just missed out, you're put into a pool, and you'll be informed then of that, and that can take a few extra weeks for them to make that decision. Even if you get a no, then just getting an application in and getting to interview is such a brilliant achievement. And most of our young people feedback that it's actually a really useful experience. And it's so competitive that, just getting to that stage is something to be really, really proud of. We're seeing our current year 13s. We're preparing them for their interviews at the minute. I've sat in on quite a lot of mock interviews this week, and it is a fantastic process to see them kind of develop those academic conversation skills. How hard is it to get in? So for 2023, this is a sense of the acceptance rates. The highest acceptance, subjects with the highest acceptance rates, subjects with the lowest acceptance rates. Obviously, some of these, music, 52% sounds like a really high acceptance rate, but obviously you've got to meet the standard in the first place, of, playing a musical instrument, which rules out a lot of people from even getting to application stage. Same with things like languages. But it is worth looking at which subjects are easier and harder and more competitive to get into, because as you can see here, maths and statistics has a rate of 4.6%. Maths 10%. So even though 10% is still really tiny, it's much higher than maths and statistics. So that's worth thinking about when you put that application in. And if you're thinking about something sort of humanities based, maybe something like HSBS, or PPE, politics, philosophy, and economics, or literature, something like that, then actually it might be worth considering something like classics, because the acceptance rate is so much higher. Again, we can advise on all these things later on in year 12. So what do Oxbridge expect from their applicants? They expect you to have very high grades. We talked about that. They also expect you to be studying subjects, currently studying subjects that meet the entry requirements. They are not flexible. They have too many applications for them to be flexible. So if the entry requirements say you must be studying further maths and you're not studying further maths, unfortunately, you won't be, well, you can apply, but you will not hear anything back from that application. They expect you to do well in your pre-admissions assessments. They expect extensive supercurricular reading and engagement. I'm going to talk about that in a sec because it's so key. They expect you to research the course, know quite a lot about the course. At interview, they will expect you to talk about what it is about that particular course at their particular university that you want to study. And they want to see a genuine passion and interest from the applicants. They do not want you to be an expert interviewee, and they don't expect you to be. They don't expect you to be, super fluent and smooth. They don't expect you to be able to answer every question immediately. And they don't expect you to have a laundry list of extracurricular activities that are nothing to do with your subject. So I speak to students every year who say, "Oh, I'm really worried because, I don't play an instrument. I haven't done Duke of Edinburgh. I haven't been volunteering at orphanages or hill climbing or or writing novels in my spare time, and that's not necessary. They are wanting really strong academic candidates. They're wanting you to excel in your subject, and because of that, supercurricular study is absolutely key. So supercurricular study refers to any learning that you have done independently outside the classroom. So it's things that are not on your syllabus, not on your spec, things that you've, read, seen, galleries that you've been to, podcasts that you've listened to, articles that you've read, journals that you've read, lectures that you've attended, anything that advances your knowledge in that subject area that you've done on your own. And that's because every single person who applies for, um, politics, philosophy, and economics is going to have 3A and A star grades. Those grades don't make you stand out amongst the people who are applying because everyone's brilliant. You need to show that instead that you are capable of being an exceptional academic, and this is how you do it. You have to show them, not tell them. So show them, that you have read loads of things, that you've been to loads of stuff. The best way to do this is to build up a research portfolio in and around your subject. So things like when you read your set text, if you've got a set text in English or you've got your textbook in history or whatever, look in there and look for other texts by the same authors, or look in the kind of look at the authors, look at what else they've written, look at the source lists, see where those sources have come from, and go and read those things. Follow those authors and researchers, find them on social media, find what university they work at, look up their stuff, read articles, read news articles, follow podcasts, watch documentaries, attend lectures. Universities provide free workshops and lectures all the time. Gresham College in central London provides free lectures that you can go to in person or watch afterwards. Anything you can do to develop your knowledge. And really as well, this should be something that you enjoy, because it is the kind of thing that you have to do at Oxford and Cambridge. So if you don't enjoy it, again, it might be something to have a go at and think, oh, this isn't really for me. Maybe this isn't what I actually want to do for 3 years. I really can't recommend enough that you start now, because you cannot cram this in a month before an interview. They will be able to tell that you're just listing things off, but you don't really know anything about them. You've got to get that depth of knowledge. And the best place to start is to go to your teachers and ask them, tell them you want to apply for Oxbridge, ask for their recommendations, and get going. Equally, looking at BBC Sounds, looking at your podcasts on Spotify and putting keywords in, start there. It doesn't have to be just academic, it doesn't just have to be PhD papers. All reading, all learning is super curricular. I also recommend that you keep some kind of log because you will forget. So keep a diary, keep a log of everything you watch, read, do. So when it comes to summer and you're writing your personal statement up, you can pull that up and you know you've got everything there that you can tell your admissions tutor about. Extremely briefly, just because I've mentioned it and it can be confusing. Oxford and Cambridge have a collegiate system. It's quite unusual. There are a handful of universities in the UK that have it, but Oxbridge is a very, very defined collegiate system to the extent that you actually apply to the college, not the university. The degree, the exams you sit are the same, the degree you get is the same, regardless of which college you're based at. It's a bit like your base school at the swap, if you think about it that way. But there are differences between the college in terms of where they are, whether they're old or new, how many people live in them, what the accommodation's like, so on and so forth. Not all colleges admit students for all subjects as well, so do check that a college actually offers your subject. Each uni has about 30. We will do lots more on this again later in the year, including sort of how to research colleges and how to look at admission statistics and things like that if we want to do a deep dive into it. But the alternative is if you're not interested in engaging with any of that, you can just put in an open application, which doesn't disadvantage you in any way. And that just means that you will be allocated to a college. So there's no need to get worried about colleges. It is a preference and really nothing more. So that's a very, very kind of quick whistle stop tour of Oxbridge. So just to make sure I don't take up too much of your evening, we'll move straight on to medicine. I'm using medicine really as a shortcut here for medicine, dentistry, and veterinary. The application process is a little bit different, but there are so many similarities between the three that I'm using it as a shortcut. So the most important thing for these courses is to make sure that you're studying the right subjects. Obviously, you can't change them now, but what you can do is look at which medicine, dental, or veterinary schools require which particular subjects and make sure that you apply to the right ones. So you can see there's just a chart there. This is for medical schools in particular. A star and A grades are required, just like Oxbridge. They will expect you to be applying with A star and A grades. It's worth knowing as well that most medical schools also consider GCSEs. They do this in a different way. Some ask for 7s and above or 6s and above in certain subjects. Some of them do like a scoring system where they score your application based on your predicted grades, how good your personal statement is, your reference, your GCSE grades, so on and so forth. But they do consider them. So when you're looking at entry requirements, check. And it is competitive. So acceptance rate is about 16% in 2024. So this year. For 2025, applications are slightly down. So this is a good year to be applying. But applications for medicine have been they went really high over the COVID period. They've now come back down to sort of 2019 sort of levels. It's really important to note as well that 37 out of 39 of British medical schools require you to sit an assessment called a UCAS, and that's sat between year 12 and year 13. So in that summer between year 12 and year 13, you can register for it from June and sit it up to September and including September. That test is a very, very particular test. It's broken down into 5 different sections. It's not a knowledge test. It's not a test of what you've learned in your A levels. It's got nothing to do with that. It's a reasoning and decision making and judgment test. Because of that, the questions are very specific to the UCAS. So this is something that you must revise for and prepare for really, really well. You must learn the format. You must learn the structure. Most medical schools pay a lot of attention to your UCAS score. And if your UCAS score is not good enough, again, you just won't be invited for interview, regardless of what your academic grades are. So it is something that you absolutely need to prepare for. Let's look at our timeline then for medicine. So it's quite similar to the one we just looked at. So exactly the same as Oxbridge. Check those entry requirements, register for the UCAT in summer of year 12. As I say, the UCAT does have a cost. It's £75. If you receive bursary, then you are exempt from the cost. And it has to be sat at an exam centre, a Pearson centre somewhere in London and booked by the student. We can't book it for you. Sit the UCAT, get your application in by the October deadline, which is the same as the Oxbridge deadline. Interviews then take place between December and March. So the amount of time is much broader. All the Oxbridge interviews take place in about 2 weeks, but the medicine ones are more spread out. So if you apply for medicine and you haven't heard anything by sort of the Christmas break or even January, doesn't mean you haven't got an interview. It can take them ages to get back to you and let you know you've got an interview. So it's not something to worry about. And you will get your decision this time by April usually. So again, it's a longer deadline. That's partly because the interviews are quite complicated, so the schools just need longer to conduct those interviews. Just like supercurricular is the key thing, the key factor around Oxbridge, work experience is that key extra factor for medicine. So you need supercurricular study too. You need to, or rather, you need to show why you would make a good doctor or a good vet or a good dentist. You need to show that you've got the academic skills and the broader interest. But it's the work experience that absolutely defines it here. It is so, so important. Firstly, students must have some clinical work experience. So, clinical work experience is work experience that takes place in a hospital, dentists, vets, or similar. Get as much as you can, but generally, universities do understand that it can be quite difficult. Some medical schools and especially some veterinary schools have a defined amount of clinical experience that you have to have. So the Royal Veterinary College, for example, I think it's 2 weeks. You have to have a total of a minimum of 2 weeks clinical work experience. Might be a bit more, but again, that's something to check on the entry requirements. Some are much looser and they just say they want some work experience. We do have some links. We've got links with the Royal Free, and we work our hardest to get students a couple of days of clinical work experience. But we do expect students to look for their own clinical work experience, and the university will also expect you to be active enough to be looking for your own work experience and not just rely on the school. However, you do need to be a successful applicant. You need a much broader record of voluntary work. Ideally, this is in somewhere with caring responsibilities or where you're working with vulnerable people. So for dentistry and medicine, or for veterinary, working with animals. So for dentistry and vet and medicine, really good places are any charitable work, but places like food banks, care homes are fantastic. Anywhere in the NHS, primary schools doing reading and so on with primary schools, that is seen in a really, really positive light. If you are applying for veterinary, things like grooming, kennels, catteries, grooming parlors, places like that are really good places to look for experience. Aim for at least 6 months of continuous voluntary work. Now, obviously, I know that's not possible for everyone. I know a lot of some people have to work. It's hard, you actually do paid work. It's hard to fit it around. But if you can try and get even just an hour or so a week of voluntary work that's continuous, I cannot stress how much difference that makes in an application. We work with Imperial College on our interview workshops, and one thing Dr. Taylor from Imperial College absolutely emphasizes is just that point. That is one of the key things they are looking for from applicants. A little bit then on the medicine interview process. Again, just like Oxbridge, I'm not going to go into this loads because we do prepare students for this if they do get to the interview stage. But it's worth knowing now what the experience is like. Expect to be interviewed. Most universities use the MMI format, multiple mini interviews. So this is like a series of stations that assess different skills. So you have 10 minutes or whatever, 15 minutes at each station, and then you move on to a different station that assesses a different skill. So during these interviews, you should expect to answer questions on your personal statement, talk about medical ethics, talk about why you want to be a doctor or a vet or a dentist. You should also expect to do some role play. So they might ask you to, be the doctor or be the patient in a certain scenario. A lot of the time, they have real patients, so real members of the public involved in these interviews. And there will also be, you should expect some dexterity or manual skills test, especially if you're applying for dentistry, because that is a key part of dentistry. As I've already said, we do work with Imperial College to prepare students for interviews. We get mock interviews for students whenever we can. It's a bit harder to do the MMI format, but we do prepare students as best as we can for medicine interviews. And we expect students as well to do their own research and their own learning. So at this stage, then, December of year 12, what can you do now to gain an advantage? Well, the first thing, as I've said lots of times, is to start early, is to start now. Log all your supercurricular and work experience so you don't forget about it. One of my another really strong recommendation is that you apply for some summer schools. Now we call them summer schools. They're not really summer schools. A lot of them, they used to be. A lot of the time, they used to take place at the end of July or in August for a week or so. But now most of them are more like continual mentoring programs, often a mixture of remote and in-person workshops and sessions, and they usually include a one-to-one mentor who will also help you with all the interview and application prep. Really amazing ones to look at are the Sutton Trust summer schools. So the applications for those open in January. They are in association with Cambridge, Warwick, Durham, loads of really amazing universities. The Oxford's program, which is called Unique, opens on the 12th of December. Really worth applying for. UCL Target Medicine Mentoring Scheme, obviously at UCL, absolutely brilliant. This scheme is completely world class in terms of preparing young people for medicine applications, but it closes on the 9th of December. So hurry up if you want to apply for that one. And K Plus King's College closes on the 10th of January. K Plus has 8 different streams, actually, humanities, STEM, all kinds of different things. And it also has a medicine stream as well. These summer schools or mentorship programs or whatever we call them, as well as giving you all that support and all that prep, some of them entitle you, people who complete them, to a contextual offer. So the K plus one, if you complete it, gives you a lower offer in some subjects. So they're worth doing for loads and loads of different reasons. You don't have to apply to the university that you do the scheme at either. Obviously, it looks great if you do Unique and you apply to Oxford, but if you do K plus and apply to Oxford, they recognize how good that program is as well. So they apply across the board. Take advantage of mentorships as well, mentorship arrangements. So Oxbridge Launchpad is an amazing scheme. It's run by state school students who are currently at Oxford or Cambridge, and they offer mentoring, interview prep, personal statement workshops, all kinds of absolutely brilliant stuff. If you log onto there and you register as an interested student, then later on in the year, they start matching you up with people. It's a really, really good scheme. Give yourself plenty of time to plan and prepare your personal statement. Please don't try and knock it out in September. Start early, get loads of feedback in plenty of time. Bother your tutor, give them loads of drafts of it, get them to look it over, and really work with your teachers. Don't keep them in the dark. Tell them that you are applying for these subjects. Ask them for help. They will be more than happy to help you or point you towards someone who can help you. So one thing I'm asked every year is, what if my grades just aren't high enough? So people who really want to go to Oxford or Cambridge or really want to do medicine, but they just don't have those A and A star grades. So medicine, dentistry, and veterinary all offer what's called a gateway or foundation option. This is a 6-year undergraduate course instead of 5 years with an integrated foundation year. They are limited and they have strict criteria. So some of them have widening participation criteria. So you have to be the first person in your family to go to university, for example, or have received free school meals. Or some of them, at some universities, you have to live in a particular area, but not all of them are that restricted. The King's College one isn't that restricted, for example. Best way to access them is to join something like K Plus, a summer school, because that can give you access to those courses if you, even if you might not have had it before because you don't meet the eligibility criteria. And both Oxford and Cambridge offer a fully funded foundation year for students who have real potential, but don't quite have those A&A star grades. So widening participation criteria does apply to those. The Oxford one is called Astrophoria. The Cambridge one is just called the foundation year. They are fully funded, which means there's no tuition fees. They also pay for your accommodation, your travel, your food, because the idea is that it shouldn't stop having to do an extra year, shouldn't stop anyone accessing Oxford or Cambridge. So if you are, looking at this next year and it gets to summer of year 12 and it's not likely that you're going to get those A&A star grades, then start looking at Gateway Foundation early, checking the eligibility criteria and making sure that you meet the deadline. You will still need a minimum of about 3 Bs to access those pathways. The medicine ones you'll likely need an A in biology or chemistry. So it's still not low grades, but it is lower than the standard offer. You can't apply for these if you do meet the standard offer. So if you are going to get A's and A stars, you can't apply for foundation. You have to apply for the standard course. So finally, then, really, what support is available for our early entrants? So we give a lot of in-school support. We are UCAS pathway support starts in the second half of the spring term when we take all our students to UCAS Discovery. And we do our UCAS program throughout the summer term, which prepares students. But we start a bit earlier than that with our early entry applicants. So we will have an aspirational team that will be set up after Christmas that we will add students to. There will be aspirational seminars on all kinds of different topics, preparation for interviews, note-taking workshops, close textual analysis, building different kinds of skills, personal statements. We can signpost work experience. We can give advice. We do help students with placements where we can. We also signpost lots and lots of stuff. So webinars, conferences and workshops, mentoring, like I've already said, and more. We do mock interview support, and we have partnerships with various different sort of universities, other schools and colleges that we use to help get our students the support that we need. What I would say is just keep an eye on and please be aware of courses online being advertised as a Cambridge preparation course or medicine online work experience, things like that. And when you click on them, it costs like £2,000. Please be wary of them. They are usually not in association with a university. They're private companies. There's no quality control over those things. If all the widening participation courses, so the ones I've talked about, Sutton Trust, King's, Oxford, whatever, they are free. You don't have to pay because the idea is that it makes it easier to go to university, not harder. So if you're coming across stuff online and you're not sure about it, it looks a bit ropey, feel free to email it to me and I will take a look at it. And please do that before you hand over any money. So here is my email address, along with a lovely selection of photos of our students last year. Please take a note of my email address. Feel free to contact me about anything to do with Oxbridge, UCAS, medicine, veterinary, dentistry. So you are aware, each different LaSWAP school has its own UCAS coordinator, who is ultimately responsible for the UCAS applications in that school. And UCAS references are written by the students, teachers and tutor. I don't write everybody's UCAS references. And I'm also not the UCAS coordinator for all of the schools. I'm absolutely happy to answer questions, but in some cases I may need to refer you back to the head of year or the director at the individual school to answer specific questions. Okay, so 40 minutes. I've kept the time. I'm going to just have a couple of a minute or so. I'm going to have a look in the chat, see what questions we've got. If I've answered all your questions today, please feel free to leave and have a lovely evening. If you'd like the slides, you can email me and request them. I'm also going to put this video on YouTube tomorrow, and the link will be on the website and in the LaSwap newsletter this fortnight. If you don't get the LaSwap newsletter, again, feel free to drop me an email. I'll make sure that you're on the mailing list because, again, that has tons of stuff in about universities, open days, summer schools, mentoring schemes, things like that. They're all promoted through that newsletter. So if you're not getting it, please do drop me an email and I'll make sure that you do. Okay, lovely. Great. So I am just going to hang around for a few minutes. So if you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat and I will be with you. Sorry about my uh, very glowy light, by the way, which is obscuring my face. Oh, lovely. First question. So early entry means you have to have decided all five of your choices. No, it doesn't. That's an excellent question. So you have to have the application in by the 15th, and it has to have your early entry courses on it. So your Oxford or Cambridge course, your medicine, dentistry, veterinary, but you can add the others at other universities at any point up to the normal UCAS deadline, which is the last Wednesday of January. So you can just log back into UCAS and you can add them in. A lot of our students have done that this year. They've only applied for one and they're now thinking about their other four and they just go back in and add them in. So yeah, you don't have to, you only have to decide the early entry ones, not the rest. Are most university open days in the summer or autumn? Yes, they are. So they tend to be in two chunks. There tends to be one around in the summer term, around kind of Mayish, May and June. And then there's another chunk around September, October, beginning of November. Some universities allow you to visit them through the year. Lots of them now have virtual open days that you can go to, obviously, at any time. But if you want to go and visit them in person, yes, it's around those times. They are increasingly on Saturdays. But some of them still take place on weekdays. If a young person, if a student would like to go to an open day, they will be authorized to do so. But please do let us know as your let your base school know that you're going to an open day. What supercurricular would you recommend for medicine applications? So I think it's reading around, I would say reading around interesting breakthroughs in medicine. Again, if you look at Gresham College, if you just Google for Gresham College, they have a medicine section which has lots of doctors, surgeons talking about different interesting things that they've done. So medical breakthroughs are good. Medical ethics is really important. I would really recommend that. I'd recommend learning a little bit about the NHS. And about different roles in the NHS and how the NHS works and what you might want to do when you work there, and learning about sort of why doctors and doctors' experiences. So reading memoirs even of why people have become doctors might help young people to realize that they want to do the same, or they absolutely don't want to do the same. Do Oxbridge colleges have separate open days? No, they just have the university will have an open day, but colleges do sometimes have separate events around that. But there is an Oxford open day and a Cambridge open day. Will the changes to personal statements have been made in time for our early entry deadline? So I think this might be referring to changes to personal statements that are happening this year as part of UCAS. just a overview for people who are not quite sure. The personal statement, which for years has been a continual piece of writing, 4,000 characters, as of this year, so as of year 12 students this year, it's been broken down into three different questions. So the content, to be honest with you, is exactly the same. We break it down into three questions for them anyway when we give guidance to young people on writing personal statements. But it's now being submitted in the three sections rather than the continual one. That will be the same for all personal statements as of now, basically. So as of for 2026 entry. So yes, that will apply to early entry courses, but it will apply to all the other courses as well. So not just early entry. And of course, students will have plenty of guidance on those personal statements when it comes to later in year 12. Lovely. I'm just going to have one more minute and I'm going to pop my email in the chat just in case anyone didn't get it. And as I say, if you have any questions, do drop me a line. Uh, Sorry, one more. What super curriculars would you recommend for psychology? So, for any sort of academic subject, what I would recommend is that you start with the things that you're interested in that subject. So, what have you studied? Which modules have you studied that you found really fascinating in class? So, was it, are you really interested in research methods? Maybe not. Are you really interested in crime and deviance? Probably. And then start from there as your base. Ask your look. So, in your textbook, there will be examples of theorists, of researchers, of famous psychological experiments, and there will be very, very short summaries of them or little bits of information about them. Take that, go and find out more about it. So if you read about a particular experiment in a textbook, you found it fascinating, Google it, look it up, read what happened, read the original paper if you can get access to it, then try and find out if there's any controversy about it. Did anybody, are there any sort of other studies refuting it? Anybody disliked it? Anybody argue against it? Like that kind of place is a really good place to start from. But equally, things like psychology podcasts are really interesting. And a lot of the time they do start on quite a surface level, like they might seem quite basic, but they mention or reference loads and loads of other things that you can go and do a deep dive into. And if you're really not sure, ask your teachers. They are experts, and they will help with reading suggestions and supercurricular suggestions. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. And I hope to see everybody on another one of these or in person at some point in the new year. Have a fantastic end of year break and see you all soon. Goodbye.